Hey, it's
Mandela.
Grace Marie and Dajit, and we are back with the weird and esoteric world of what the fuck is going on in my world. We are back, and we want to talk a little bit more about timeline jumping, specifically the Mandela effect, because I am sorry, but in my world, that man died in 1996. May he rest
Oh
in
my
peace.
God. Oh my God. Yeah.
In our last episode, we did talk about Jiffy peanut butter a little bit. It is Jiffy peanut butter. I'm sorry, you can call it Jif all you want. It's Jiffy peanut butter. And there are a lot of other people who remember that as well. And Dashit, we didn't even talk about your stuff. So let's talk about a little bit about some of your weird shit that's happened when it comes to this timeline shift.
Wow. Okay. So at the middle of our episode, we had a small talk, and you brought up the concept of Mandela effect, and I previously was thinking I do not have a lot of experience in timeline shift. I mean, that is a exotic thing to me, and you are the one who is experienced. But the thing is, a few years back, a friend of mine brought out the topic of, he just asked me like that, what do you think? When did Mandela died? I was like, he died probably in like what, 70s, 80s or something like that. And he was like, dude, he's alive. I'm like, what? I'm like, what? What are you kidding with me? He can't be alive, right? And it's like he died in 70s and 80s, and back when he was talking, he was still alive. It's like that can't be true. I mean, like I have not done a whole lot of research about Mandela, and I have not read his book by then. But he's a famous figure, and he is a world figure for Christ's sake, right? And as world figure goes, you have a background data like when people lived, when people, for example, Gandhi or Hitler or somebody, Churchill, when people lived and when they died. It's there in your background memory. So it was there for Mandela also. Somehow, for him, he said, he lived at a particular time, and I thought like, no, he should have died long ago. It can't be possible. And he said that that is the Mandela effect. A whole lot of people think that, and I just brushed it off as one of those weird things that keep happening, where a whole lot of people got mass deluded into a concept for some natural reasons, and that was about it until I heard from you again. Would you like to tell me about your side of the Mandela story?
I remember hearing he had just been released from jail, and then
Hmm.
he passed away because of all the injuries that he had suffered while he was in jail. That's it. That was the story. And it was a terrible tragedy, but he wasn't yet as much of an international figure as he had been. He was just a side note, a protester in South Africa, who had been kind of a lightning rod for the attempt to end apartheid. He was very beloved of those of us who were attempting to fix some of these wrongs that had been
Yeah.
happening around the world.
Right.
But he wasn't necessarily a household name at that point. Now he's a household
Hmm.
name. And I think that's why a lot of people didn't realize that this weird shift in the timeline had happened, is because they didn't know about him back then.
Hmm.
They only knew about him afterwards, when he apparently became president, and he,
Hmm.
is part of that whole bigger conversation about ending apartheid and really integrating, to whatever degree it's integrated now, the culture of South Africa.
Hmm.
And yet, there's a whole bunch of us, not just me, but a whole bunch of us that
Hmm.
are here to tell you that in our worlds, that didn't happen. He passed away. And then when he became president, it blew a lot of our minds because, or when he ran for president, it blew a lot of our minds because we had been around to hear about his death. And we're like, I thought he died.
What?
I thought he
You
died.
heard? You actually heard about his death, like
Yeah, well,
announced.
it was not front page news at that time because he wasn't that big, but it was
Hmm.
definitely news back in the mid 90s when he passed. And then a couple years later, he pops back up and he is, running for president and whatever. And we're like, I thought I was the only one. I'm sitting there going, I thought he died. Okay, that's weird, but okay. Because what else can you do, right? Apparently I was mistaken because the poor man's still alive and he's to South Africa. And then, a while later, I heard that, he is not the only, I'm not the only one. I am not the only one who thought that. Now that was one that was after the Jiffy thing, but before after my first timeline jump. Another one that really throws me for a loop is it was a comedian back in the late 80s, early 90s, Sinbad. He was in this really dopey movie that does not exist in this timeline.
What are you talking about?
He was in, I can't even remember the name of the movie now. But anyways, he was in this movie and it was him in a pirate costume and I remember the cutout because I walked past it like 4 times when I was going to the movies that year. And he's leaning his elbow on a little kid. And apparently this movie does not exist. And Sinbad has said he was not in this movie. And yet there's a whole bunch of us that remember the movie, that remember the cutout from that was, in all of the movie theaters that year, that some of us have owned the VHS and it's now disappeared out of our collections. It's just bizarre.
Are you kidding?
I actually saw the movie. I remember distinctly that everybody made fun of him that year for making this silly movie because it was so goofy looking. And because he was kind of an edgier comedian, not really, but a little edgier. And then he's making this silly kids movie. It was this big deal the year that it came out. And I remember him in this weird pirate's costume, kind of like the genie in Aladdin, but a black guy. And, he's leaning his elbow on this little kid's head in this cutout. Anyways.
Wow. Now,
real.
This movie.
What do you have to say about it?
This movie, when did it came out? Like, what year was it happening?
I want to say it was, I'd have to look. It was somewhere in the late 80s to the early 90s. I want to say 89. I want to say 89, but it might have been 88. Okay.
We are more around the 88.
Somewhere in there. Okay. Because I remember I was with, my long time ago, ex-boyfriend and I were going to the movies on a pretty regular basis. And we seemed to always end up in the same bloody theater. And in the doorway of that theater was this picture of the cardboard cutout of Dad and the kid.
Wow, that's so interesting. Now, you mentioned that a whole bunch of people remember the poster. Do you still know people who would, affirm to this whole poster thing that it happened and now it doesn't exist, and the VHS thing?
I don't know anybody in real life that I've talked to about it. I just know that there are other people who are
like the Mandela effect,
who have had the Mandela effect. And when you do any kind of research on the Mandela effect, that's one of the big ones that comes up. There are also companies that don't exist in this timeline that I remember. There are products that never existed that I remember in my timeline. There are
like the Jiffy,
like the Jiffy. Well, but even like full-on products that I remember from back in the 70s or the 80s, even into the 90s, that never actually existed. Kind of like the movie. But I can't, and it's making me crazy. If anybody remembers the name of it, drop the name of it down below.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. There are some weird things going on in timelines.
That is so interesting. I mean, like, wow. Uh, you know what? There's one thing that like I'd like to share. It's because we are talking about timelines here. The the first time I talked to you about personally about the whole timeline experience, and you opened up, the one thing that was constantly going on in my mind is that I don't have any such, that sort of, huge timeline shifts like you did, where I could absolutely confirm. But for the last 3.5 years, a change has happened, and that was way before I ever heard about the concept of timeline shift. But I was like, mentally, the whole idea was coming like, man, I'm not in that version of reality where I used to be. I have made a shift, you know. And after that, I was coming to know about these things, and it connected kind of. I'd really like to share that one thing that happened, because it also has a little connection with the sleep paralysis thing that happened, the entities and stuff also. Now it just connected back when you were just telling the story. I also remember you also mentioned that you saw those entities at certain times also. Maybe in some of these episodes, we're just going to connect things back, you know? I'm just hoping. So
Absolutely.
one connection that I had was like, I have to open certain things up. That is like, my last girlfriend, when we started dating, an event comes where kind of, when you were meeting another person, at a point comes where you decide, yeah, I want to be with that person, and a kind of shift happens internally where you connect, right? I do
Yeah.
not know for other people happens or not. For me, I felt that I kind of opened up and allowed myself to be vulnerable for somebody to enter in and to change me in a way. That's how I felt it.
Yeah.
I remember very, very vividly. I was doing my MBA. It was my first year. I was staying in what is usually called here in India, a paying guest kind of place. And I was staying there. And I clearly remember that when just even the day before, I was getting so many, of those sleep paralysis experiences where I would fall to sleep and immediately the frogs would start groaning. And it happened to me almost the same way. I had that experience and it was becoming so frequent. And it was the first time the groaning sounds were coming out and not the normal sleep paralysis. So I was freaking out. But it felt like normal. It's because my life since I was young was also the esoteric type, spiritual longing, enlightenment, and stuff like that. So all these things are part and parcel of my theme in a sense. So if I even if I freak out, there's a inside me. I'm like excited, like cool stuff are happening, right? It should happen. Now I remember very, very vividly that the day I was texting my ex-girlfriend back then, and that shift happened. Like we thought, like, yeah, we are in a relationship right now. And I remember just the day before, I was listening to some rock music and stuff like that, which I used to. After the very same day, I was not the same person. After I made that shift, I mean, like literally the next hour, not even the next hour, the next 30 minutes, I felt a shift happening. I went to sleep. It was like 10:30. I texted her, went to sleep at 11 or something, and I'm feeling like, man, I've changed. A change is happening. I'm not the same. And I woke up and I don't have the same music taste anymore. I did not listen to the same music that I was listening. After for the next 2 years at least, there was no sleep paralysis. There was no beings, no entities, nothing. And during those 2 years, there was a wild ride that happened after the breakup and stuff like that. Things happened that brought me so much torturous experience, I would say, and because it had a lot of bad things involved and a lot of crazy stuff also. But I felt like this is not what was supposed to be happening in my life. I mean, like, this is not my theme. This is not my stuff. But and I'm going to the wrong tangent in a sense. I should not be going there. And I was feeling the torture, because my life is getting harder and harder and harder and stuff. Now I remember that another time I made a shift. I decided to break my value structure back then and decided to shift into an entirely opposite way. I was doing that. And when that happened, I was literally trying to change my personality into something else. and doing some weird exercises and stuff. I was writing who I want to be and stuff like that, And when I did that, again, that feeling was coming that now again my reality is shifting. Now, where I'm standing, I'm exactly the person whom I left when I was like 18 or something like that. My personality is exactly like that. I shifted in that middle section. I became something else. Right now, I have the same music taste, the same thing. I listen to the same stuff. And I felt like, what happened in the middle section? And that does not feel like me at all. Like I jumped into a different timeline and right now I'm somewhere else. Like I moved into a different tangent. That is one experience I wanted to share. Do you want to say something about that? Anything you can relate?
It's interesting that you didn't just shift into a different timeline though. You shifted into a different you, a different version of you.
Yeah.
Whereas I've always been the same person, just in different timelines. So I think there are two different ways to experience timeline jumping.
Yeah.
One is you stay the same and the things around you shift. And one is where you shift and the things around you, maybe they're shifting as well, but maybe they're not.
Wow.
But it's you that's changing. That's weird, right?
Yeah. I remember in the first episode when you were starting the topic, you mentioned these two aspects of the timeline. And I mentioned that I'm on the second one, you're on the first one. I guess this is where the both aspect comes in.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's an interesting, everything that we are going to talk about is definitely something that we could spend weeks and weeks and weeks talking about, like episode after episode. We're just kind of touch on them a little bit here and there, back and forth. So keep your eyes posted. We're definitely going to talk about this one again.
Absolutely. You know what? Since we have talked a lot about the timeline shift, I guess I'll just want to bring a little bit about the topic of, the dream you had about the pirates. We are not going to go into details about it. Maybe we'll have an entire episode on it. But the dream has a connection with timelines. It was not a normal dream, right?
Dreams do have a connection with your timelines. Absolutely. And all of us have that ability to have dreams that are this timeline, previous timelines, potential timelines, and past lives and past potential lives that maybe didn't exist. There is a school of thought that Einstein actually presented that all of time is happening right now.
Right.
All of it. All of your pasts, all of your presents, and all of the pasts and the presents of the future and past versions of you, of your soul. So all of your past lives, all of your future lives are all happening in one instant. That our soul is capable, not just capable, but thrives on living in multiple dimensions and multiple lives in the blink of an eye, in an instant.
Right.
And I really do believe that when we are asleep, the veil is more easily moved or cut through or seen through. So that is a good piece of what our dreams actually are. That's a whole other conversation though. I think we need to have one about that, and we need to talk about past lives, which I think we're going to talk about past lives next, right?
Wow, that will be really an interesting episode. So do you think we would wrap out now and leave our conversation for the next episode?
So I think that's a good one.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So if you do want to go through any more of, if you want to actually experience some of this stuff for yourself, you need to work with Dajit because he's going to get you to that next level so that you can access your higher self. My cat's about to come for a visit, so that you can
here she is,
and be the person that you want to be, and kind of cut the ties a little bit from who you once were, from who you were in past lives, from who you were in other dimensions, because we're going to go there, and start to create a future that actually makes you happy. Law of attraction stuff, it is real. So many of us screw it up. And Dijit, he's the real deal to actually get you that law of attraction, all the things that you actually want. Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
The links down below, ascendwithdijit.com, right?
Yeah, it's actually devjitkundu.com. Ascend with Devjit is my FB group. Yeah, I'll have a link in the video description for people to check out.
Dijitkundu.com. Okay,
absolutely.
Facebook group, ascendwithdijit.com. You can find both of us in there, so come hang out with us.
Yeah, that would be really awesome. See you guys again in the next episode. Bye-bye.